Wyoming, March 1920. The room smelled of death and medicine. William Thornton lay in his bed, 89 years old, chest rising and falling, with the labored rhythm of a man whose time had nearly come. The afternoon light slanted through lace curtains his wife had hung 45 years ago, casting shadows that danced like memories across the walls. His hands, once strong enough to break a horse or hold a frightened woman, now trembled against the quilt. Henry Thornton sat beside the bed, 18 years old and terrified. The draft notice lay folded in his pocket, orders to report to Camp Dodge in 3 days. Europe. War. Death waiting across an ocean. Grandpa. Henry's voice cracked. They're sending me to France. Will's eyes opened, slowly clouded with age, but still sharp with something Henry couldn't name. Understanding, maybe. Or sorrow that reached deeper than words. War. The old man's voice was a rasp, barely audible above the ticking clock on the mantel. I hoped you'd never see it. I'm scared. Henry hated admitting it, hated the way his hands shook when he thought about trenches and all the boys who wouldn't come home. What if I'm not brave enough? Will's hand moved across the quilt, found his grandson's fingers gripped with surprising strength. Let me tell you about Fear Boy, about the bravest woman I ever knew. Henry leaned closer. Grandma Maggie. A smile ghosted across Will's weathered face, there and gone like morning frost. She collapsed 3 feet from my porch. Your grandmother, December 1874. The baby in her arms never stopped crying. But you said, Henry stopped, you always said you met her at a dance in Pine Ridge. I lied. Will's eyes closed. To protect her, to protect us all. But you're going to war now. You deserve the truth. The clock ticked. Outside, snow began to fall the way it had fallen 46 years ago, when a woman dying on her feet had stumbled the last impossible yards to a stranger's door. Let me tell you what courage really looks like, Henry. Let me tell you about the winter that changed everything. The room faded, the present dissolved, and William Thornton, 9 decades of living behind him and only hours ahead, began to speak. December 12th, 1874, Wyoming Territory, the kind of cold that kills. William Thornton stood on his porch that morning, coffee growing cold in his hand, watching frost creep across the pastures like a slow disease, spreading through everything it touched. He was 43 years old. He had been alone for 11 years. The ranch hadn't heard a woman's voice in all that time, and Will had intended to keep it that way. Caring was dangerous. Caring meant losing. He'd learned that lesson when Catherine died in the back room, their unborn child dying, with her, both of them, slipping away, while he stood helpless and useless and broken. 11 years. He'd spent every one of them making sure he never cared about anything except keeping cattle alive and men fed. Noticing things required caring. Caring required feeling. And feeling was how you got destroyed. The coffee had gone cold 20 minutes ago. He hadn't noticed. Then he saw her. A figure on the road. Walking, no stumbling, each step a negotiation with gravity. She was barely winning. Something clutched against her chest, wrapped in what looked like flour sacking. The morning sun turned everything golden and terrible, and Will stood frozen, watching this impossible thing approach his impossible life. She made it 3 feet from his porch before her body gave up. She collapsed into the snow like a puppet with cut strings, graceless and final, and the bundle in her arms began to cry. That thin, desperate wail cut through the December wind and straight into the hollow place where Will's heart used to be. The coffee cup fell from his hand. He was running before his mind caught up to his body boots, punching through snow, breath tearing from his lungs in white clouds. His hands shook. God help him, his hands were shaking. He hadn't moved this fast since Catherine stopped breathing. The woman lay face down in the snow. The baby in her arms screamed that sound, drilling into Will's skull, demanding response, demanding action, demanding he'd care again when caring was the one thing he'd sworn never to do. He dropped to his knees beside her, turned her over with hands that remembered gentleness even when he'd tried to forget. A woman. Young. No, not young, just small. Thin enough that the bones of her face stood out sharp as accusations. Her eyes were closed, her lips blue, her skin the color of candle wax. And in her arms the baby. A little girl, maybe 2 years old, red gold curls plastered to her head with sweat despite the cold. The child's cheeks flushed with fever, her breath coming in desperate gasps. Ma'am. Will shook the woman's shoulder, then harder. Ma'am, can you hear me? Her eyelids fluttered. For a moment, her eyes opened. Storm cloud gray, the color of the sky before snow. They locked onto his face with an intensity that stopped his breath, a gaze that saw through him and into him and past him to something he couldn't name. Please. The word was barely a whisper. Don't let her die. Then her eyes rolled back and she went limp. Will rode harder than he'd ridden in years. The woman cradled against his chest with one arm, the reins gripped in his other hand. The baby had stopped crying sometime during the ride, and that silence terrified him more than the screaming had. Silence meant giving up. Silence meant dying. The ranch appeared through the snow like salvation. He burst through his own front door, and Sam Porter was already on his feet, dark face tight with alarm. Sam had been his foreman for 15 years, the only man who had stayed through all of Will's grief, and he knew when to talk and when to act. Get blankets. Will's voice didn't sound like his own. Hot water. Whiskey. Now. Sam moved without questions. Will laid the woman on the long table near the fireplace, the same table where Catherine used to arrange wildflowers in summer back when there was still beauty in the world. He unwrapped the baby first, his big hands clumsy with the flour sack blanket. What he found made his chest seize. A girl, 2 years old, maybe less. Those red gold curls. Cheeks flushed with fever that radiated heat against his palm like touching a coal. Her skin burned. She was burning alive from the inside. She's sick. The words came out flat, emotionless. Will turned to the woman on the table, began peeling away wet layers of clothing. Underneath, she was nothing but angles and shadows. He could count her ribs through her chemise. When he checked her pulse, it fluttered against his fingers like a trapped bird trying to escape. She's half starved. Will pulled blankets over her, tucked them tight, frozen through. Sam returned with arms full of blankets, a basin of hot water steaming in the cold air. Who is she? Don't know. Will wrapped the baby in a clean blanket, tucked her into the curve of his arm the way he'd once held newborn calves. Don't care right now. Get a fire going in the back room. That's your room, boss. Was my room. Get the fire going. By nightfall, he'd done everything he knew to do. The woman lay in his bed, the bed he hadn't slept in since Catherine died, in it, wrapped in every blanket Sam could find. A heated stone at her feet. The baby tucked beside her, still feverish, but breathing steadier now. Will sat in the chair by the door, watching them both in the firelight. He hadn't sat in this room in 11 years. The door creaked open, and Sam's face appeared in the gap. Tom made broth. Figured if she wakes up, she'll need something in her stomach. Leave it. Sam set the pot on the small table near the bed, then hesitated. Boss, you want me to sit with them? You ain't slept in forever. I'm fine. You ain't fine. Sam's voice was gentle but carried weight. You ain't been fine in 11 years. But that ain't my business. After he left, Will sat in the silence, listening to the fire crackle and the wind howl outside. The woman's breathing was shallow but steady. The little girl whimpered in her sleep, and without thinking, Will reached out and laid his hand on her small back. She quieted. He pulled his hand back like he'd touched a hot stove. Caring was dangerous. Caring was losing. But his hand still felt the warmth of her, the rise and fall of breath that meant living. The woman woke just before dawn. Will had dozed in the chair, something he hadn't done since his army days before Catherine, before the ranch, before he learned what it meant to lose everything. The sound of movement snapped him awake, and he found her struggling to sit up, eyes wild with panic. Easy. He rose slowly, hands visible, non-threatening. Easy now, you're safe. Her eyes locked onto him, and he watched her assess everything. His size, his position, the distance to the door. She was calculating escape routes, threat levels, the way a cornered animal assesses a predator. Where am I? Her voice was a rasp, barely audible, damaged by cold and screaming. Thornton Ranch, about 3 hours from Pine Ridge. You collapsed on the road. Emma. The panic sharpened, cutting through her weakness like a knife through paper. My daughter. Where's my daughter? Right beside you. Sleeping. The woman turned her head, and when she saw the little girl tucked against her side, something in her face crumpled. She pulled the child close, pressed her lips to those red gold curls, and Will looked away to give her the moment. Some things were too private for strangers to witness. She had a fever. Will spoke to the wall instead of to her. Seems to be breaking now, but you should keep her warm. How long? The woman's voice shook. How long have I been out? Most of a day. He heard her sharp intake of breath, felt the spike of fear in the room, like electricity before a storm. I need to go. She struggled to swing her legs off the bed, nearly collapsed back against the pillows. Go where Will turned to face her. There's a blizzard outside and you can barely sit up. I can't. Her voice broke. I can't stay here. You don't understand. Make me understand. They stared at each other across the small room. The fire crackled. Outside wind threw snow against the windows like handfuls of rice. And in that moment, Will saw something in her storm cloud eyes that he recognized. Terror, yes, but underneath it steel. The kind of strength that came from surviving impossible things. There are men looking for me. She spoke slowly, each word carefully chosen. If they find me here, they'll hurt anyone who helped me. What men? It doesn't matter. I just need to leave. In a blizzard with a sick baby. Will crossed his arms. Half dead yourself. That's not leaving. That's suicide. You don't know. Her hands clenched in the blanket. You don't know what he'll do. I know you collapsed on a road in the middle of nowhere carrying a child and wearing shoes held together with prayer. Will's voice was flat, stating facts without judgment. I know you haven't eaten properly in weeks, maybe months. And I know that whatever you're running from dying in a snowdrift won't solve it. The woman's jaw tightened. For a moment, he thought she'd argue. Then her shoulders sagged, and she looked down at her sleeping daughter. Her name's Emma. She's almost 2. And you? A pause. Margaret, a longer pause. Margaret Hayes, William Thornton. This is my ranch. He moved toward the door, then stopped with his hand on the frame. There's broth on the table. Eat it. When the storm passes, we'll talk. Wait. He stopped but didn't turn around. Why are you helping me? Her voice was hard, suspicious. You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. Will considered the question. Considered telling her about Catherine, about the 11 years of silence, about the fact that he'd stopped helping anyone because helping meant caring and caring meant losing. But those weren't words he knew how to say. You needed help. His hand tightened on the doorframe. That's enough. The storm raged for 3 days. Will moved into the bunkhouse with his men, giving Margaret and Emma the back room with its fire and its privacy. He told himself it was practical. The woman needed rest. The child needed quiet. It had nothing to do with the memories that room held or the way Margaret's eyes reminded him of Catherine's during the fever that killed her. He told himself a lot of things. On the second day, Sam found him repairing harnesses in the barn work that could have waited until spring. She's up and moving. Sam leaned against the stall door. Tried to make breakfast this morning, Will's hand stilled on the leather. Tried. Tom stopped her, told her she needed rest. Sam's mouth quirked. She about bit his head off. Told him she wasn't an invalid and she wasn't a charity case. And if she was going to be under this roof, she was going to earn her keep. Something shifted in Will's chest, a sensation he had almost forgotten. Interest, curiosity, something that felt dangerously close to caring. That's so sage she's a cook. Sam pulled a small bundle from his pocket and unwrapped it. Saw your notice in town before she got waylaid. What notice? The one you were going to post? For a cook. Sam raised an eyebrow. She wants the job. We'll set down the harness. She can barely stand. Didn't stop her from making the best biscuits I've had in 20 years. Sam held out the bundle. Inside was a golden biscuit, still faintly warm. Tom snuck me this. Said there's more in the kitchen. Will stared at the biscuit. Then slowly he took it and bit in. Flavor exploded across his tongue. Butter and salt and something almost sweet with a texture that practically melted. He hadn't tasted anything this good since Catherine. I'll talk to her. He found Margaret in the kitchen scrubbing the stove with a fury that suggested she was cleaning away more than grease. Emma sat on a blanket near the hearth playing with wooden spoons, her fever clearly broken. Margaret didn't look up when he entered. If you've come to tell me to rest, save your breath, I've come to talk about the joke. Her hands stilled on the iron. Slowly she straightened and turned to face him. In the daylight filtering through the window, she looked different than she had that first night. Still thin, still sharp-edged, but there was color in her cheeks now and fire in her eyes. You're offering, I'm asking. She lifted her chin. I can cook. I can clean. I can manage a kitchen and make stores last through winter. I can work harder than any man you've got. You've got a child. I've cooked with a baby on my hip since she was born. Margaret's voice carried a defensive edge. She's not a burden. She's never been a burden. The fierce protection in her tone told him everything about how she'd been treated before. Will filed that information away. $30 a month, room and board for you and the girl. You cook 3 meals a day for me and my men. You keep the kitchen and the stores organized. That's the job. That's fair. When can you start? Margaret looked around the kitchen, the stove she'd already scrubbed, the shelves she'd obviously reorganized, the pot of something that smelled like heaven simmering on the back burner. I started this morning. Despite himself, Will felt his mouth twitch. So, I see. I don't take charity, Mr. Thornton. Margaret's eyes held his. Everything I get, I earn. Then you'll fit in fine here. He moved toward the door, then paused. One thing. She tensed. He saw it, the automatic bracing for conditions, for prices, for the demands that always came. The men will treat you with respect. Will's voice was quiet but carried steel. If any of them don't, you come to me. This ranch runs on fairness. That applies to everyone under this roof. Margaret's expression flickered, surprised then something softer before the walls came back up. I'll hold you to that. I expect you will. He left her standing in the kitchen, that little girl playing at her feet, and walked out into the cold morning air. The storm was finally breaking. Sunlight pierced through the clouds for the first time in days. Behind him, he heard Margaret's voice, soft and low, singing something to Emma. He couldn't make out the words, but the melody wrapped around him like a ghost. It was the first music this ranch had heard in 11 years. That night, Margaret served her first real dinner to the men of Thornton Ranch. Will watched from his seat at the head of the table as she carried in platters of roasted beef potatoes mashed with butter and creamed green beans that had somehow emerged from the sad stores in the root cellar, and more of those miraculous biscuits. The men fell silent as the food was laid out, then descended on it like starving wolves. Lord have mercy, Tom spoke through a mouthful of beef. This is actual food. You'll insult the lady. Sam reached for seconds, but he was already filling his plate again. Young Danny Foster, 19 years old, and shy as a deer, just ate with his eyes wide like he'd never tasted anything so good in his entire life. Margaret stood back, wiping her hands on her apron, her face carefully neutral. But Will caught the flicker of something when the men started praising the meal. Surprise, maybe, or relief. Sit down. Will gestured to the empty chair beside him. She looked at him sharply. I'll eat after. You'll eat now. His voice broke no argument. You made this food. You deserve to enjoy it. I'm hired help, Mr. Thornton. Hired help doesn't sit with the boss at the table. Her spine was ramrod straight, her movements precise. On this ranch, everyone eats together. Will held her gaze. That includes you. Margaret hesitated. He could see the war in her, pride versus hunger, suspicion versus exhaustion. Finally, she pulled out the chair and sat, her posture perfect, her movements careful. Will passed her a plate. She served herself small portions, half of what any of the men were eating. You're not a bird. He spoke quietly so only she could hear. Eat. Her jaw tightened, but she added more to her plate. They ate in silence for a while, the only sounds the clink of forks and Tom's occasional moans of appreciation. Then Sam cleared his throat. Ma'am, if you don't mind my asking, where'd you learn to cook like this? Margaret's fork paused halfway to her mouth. My mother taught me, before she died. Well, Sam nodded slowly. She taught you well. She taught me everything that matters. Margaret's voice was soft, but there was steel underneath. How to work, how to survive, how to never depend on anyone for what I could provide for myself. The words hung in the air. Will watched the men exchange glances, not mocking, but thoughtful. Respectful even. Sounds like a wise woman. Sam took another bite. She was. Margaret set down her fork. She also taught me that a person's worth isn't in their circumstances. It's in their choices. Will looked at this woman, half-starved, running from something, sitting at his table with her chin raised like a queen, and felt something crack in the wall he'd built around himself. Something dangerous. Something that felt almost like hope. Your mother was right. After dinner, Will found himself lingering in the kitchen doorway, watching Margaret clean up. She'd settled Emma in a wooden box lined with blankets, a makeshift cradle that Sam had produced from somewhere, and the child slept peacefully while her mother worked. You don't have to watch me, Margaret spoke without turning around. I'm not going to steal the silverware. Didn't think you were. Then why are you standing there? Good question. Will didn't have a good answer, so he tried the truth. 11 years ago, my wife died. In that back room, the one you're using now. He watched Margaret's hands still on the pot she was scrubbing. After she died, I closed that room. Will leaned against the doorframe, closed this whole ranch in a way, made it about work and survival. Nothing else. Margaret turned slowly to face him. Why are you telling me this? Because you asked why I helped you. Will met her eyes. I didn't help you because I'm a good man. I helped you because you reminded me of her, of Catherine, the way she looked when I first met her. Scared but too proud to show it, too stubborn to give up. And what happened to Catherine? She stayed. She made this place a home. Will's voice roughened. And then she died. And I forgot what home felt like. He paused, searching for words that had been locked away for over a decade, until today. When I heard you singing to your daughter. Margaret was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was softer than he'd heard it. The men who are looking for me, they won't stop. They think I owe them something. If they find me here, you could be hurt. Then we'll handle it. Will straightened from the doorframe. You don't understand what you're offering. I understand that you need a ball and I need a cook. Will's voice was firm. The rest of it, whatever you're running from, whoever's chasing you, that's not my business unless you make it my business. You work here. You're under my protection. That's how it works on this ranch. Protection. Margaret's voice turned bitter. I've had men offer me protection before. It always comes with a price. Not here, you don't know that. You don't know me. I know you walked through a blizzard with a sick baby rather than give up. Will held her gaze. I know you woke up half dead and your first thought was for your daughter. I know you refused to stay in bed when you could be working. He stepped closer. I know enough. Margaret stared at him, those storm cloud eyes searching his face, looking for lies, for traps, for the hooks that always came hidden in kindness. This time, whatever she found seemed to satisfy something. All right, her voice was barely above a whisper. I'll stay. For now. For now is good enough. He turned to leave, then stopped. Margaret, yes. Welcome to Thornton Ranch. He didn't wait for her response. He walked out into the cold night, past the bunkhouse where his men were settling in for sleep, to the edge of the property where the fence line marked the boundary between his land and the endless darkness beyond. The stars were emerging bright and cold. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. Behind him, the ranch looked different than it had this morning. Light glowed in the kitchen window. The smell of good food lingered in the air. And for the first time in 11 years, there was a woman's voice in the house, soft and low, singing a child to sleep. Will stood at the fence line and felt something shift in his chest. Something that felt almost like hope. He didn't trust it. Hope was for people who hadn't lost everything yet. But he didn't crush it either. Not tonight. The first week changed everything. Margaret woke before dawn every morning, built up the fire, and had coffee brewing before any of the men stirred. By the time they stumbled into the kitchen, still half asleep and frostbitten from the walk between the bunkhouse and the main building, she had breakfast waiting. Eggs scrambled with wild onions she'd found dried in the pantry. Bacon fried crisp but not burned. More of those biscuits that Tom swore were worth dying for. Miss Margaret. Danny spoke up on the third morning, his young face bright with something like reverence. I think I love you. You love my cooking, Margaret corrected, refilling his coffee. There's a difference. Is there, though? Sam cuffed the boy gently on the back of the head. Mind your manners. But Margaret caught herself almost smiling. Almost. Will watched these exchanges from his seat at the head of the table, eating steadily, saying little. He'd always been a man of few words, but now his silences felt different. Less empty, more attentive. On the fourth morning, he lingered after the others had gone to their work. You're settling in. Margaret looked up from the dishes she was washing. Is that a question or an observation? Observation. He stood by the door, hat in his hands, turning it slowly between his fingers. The men are happier than I've seen them in years. Full bellies tend to improve morale. It's more than that. Will paused, seeming to weigh his next words. You treat them like people, not just workers. Margaret's hands stilled in the soapy water. Shouldn't everyone? Doesn't always happen. He put his hat on, tugging the brim low. I'll be in the north pasture most of the day. Sam knows where to find me if you need anything. I won't need anything. The corner of his mouth twitched. I'm starting to believe that. He left, and Margaret stood at the sink, watching through the window as he mounted his horse and rode out into the white blanketed morning. Emma babbled happily from her blanket near the hearth, and Margaret felt something dangerous bloom in her chest. Something that felt almost like belonging. She crushed it before it could take root. The trouble started on the sixth day. Margaret was kneading bread dough when she heard the shouts from the barn. She wiped her hands on her apron and moved to the window, her heart already climbing into her throat. Through the frost-fogged glass, she could see men running, could hear Tom's voice raised in something that sounded like panic. She looked at Emma sleeping peacefully in her makeshift cradle. Then she grabbed her shawl and ran. Inside the barn, chaos reigned. A horse was down, thrashing its eyes or rolling white with pain. Danny was trying to hold its head, while Tom struggled with its legs, and Sam stood back, his face grim. "What happened?" Margaret pushed through to the front. "Colic," Sam said shortly. "Bad one. She's been down for 20 minutes. Where's Mr. Thornton North pasture? Won't be back for hours." Sam's voice was heavy with what he wasn't saying, with what they all knew. A horse down for 20 minutes with colic was a horse that probably wouldn't get up. Margaret saw the rifle leaning against the stall. She knew what it meant. She'd seen colic before on the farms where she'd worked as a girl. She knew what happened when a horse couldn't stand. She knew the look in Sam's eyes. "You're going to shoot her. Might have to." The weight in his voice was enormous. "This is Thornton's best mare, belonged to his wife. But if she can't get up, I can't let her suffer. Let me try something." Margaret's voice cut through the chaos, clear and certain. Sam turned to stare at her. "Ma'am, there's nothing you can do. This is colic. Either she gets up or she doesn't. My father was a farrier." Margaret was already moving toward the mare's head, ignoring the way Danny scrambled back in surprise. "I grew up around horses." Sam's expression said he didn't believe her, but he also didn't stop her. Margaret knelt beside the mare's head, her hands finding spots her father had taught her years ago. Pressure points, places where the body stored pain, places where if you knew what you were doing, you could sometimes offer relief. The mare's eye rolled toward her, wild with fear and agony. "Easy, girl." Margaret's voice was soft. "Easy now." She worked her hands along the mare's neck, her belly finding the tight knots of muscle and pressing firmly. The mare groaned, tried to thrash, but Danny held her head steady. "Tom, I need you to walk her. The moment she tries to get up, we walk her. Don't stop no matter what. Walk her anywhere. Just keep her moving. The motion helps move the gas through." Minutes passed. Margaret's arms burned with efforts, sweat dripping down her face despite the cold. She found another knot pressed hard, and the mare's whole body shuddered. Then, like a miracle, the horse lurched. "Now." Margaret scrambled back as the mare heaved herself onto her legs, stumbling, but standing. "Tom, go." Tom grabbed the halter and started moving, leading the mare in slow circles around the barn. The horse's head was low. Her breathing labored, but she was walking. She was alive. Sam stared at Margaret like he'd never seen her before. "Where the hell did you learn that?" Margaret pushed her hair back from her sweaty face. "I told you, my father was a farrier. That wasn't farrier work." Sam shook his head slowly. "That was something else. It was survival." Margaret met his eyes. "When you grow up with nothing, you learn everything, because you never know what might save your life." Will returned at dusk to find his best mare alive, walking slow circles in the paddock with Tom at her side. He found Margaret in the kitchen, flour on her cheeks, stirring a pot of stew like nothing had happened. "Sam told me." Margaret didn't look up. "Told you what?" "That you saved Bella's life." "I did what anyone would do." "No, we'll cross to where she stood close enough that she could smell the cold on his coat, the leather, the faint scent of tobacco." "You did what almost no one could do." Sam's been working horses for 30 years. He didn't know that trick. "It's not a trick." Margaret kept her eyes on the stew. "It's just knowledge. Knowledge you shouldn't have." Will's voice was quiet. "Not a woman who claims she was just a cook." Margaret's hands stilled on the spoon. Slowly she turned to face him, and Will saw something flicker in those storm cloud eyes. Fear, defiance, both at once. "I told you." Her voice was carefully controlled. "I learned to survive." That meant learning a lot of things. Things like saving horses. Will's gaze held hers, like knowing pressure points, like medical skills you're not supposed to have. Her chin lifted. "What do you want me to say?" "That I learned from doctors, from medical books, from desperate necessity. I want to understand who you are. I'm your cook. That's all you need to know. They stood there barely a foot apart, tension crackling between them like heat lightning. Margaret could feel her heart hammering against her ribs, could feel the way his presence filled the space around her, making her feel small and exposed. Will broke first. He stepped back, running a hand through his hair. You're right, it's not my business. He moved toward the door, then stopped. But Margaret, what? Thank you. For Bella. His voice roughened. She was the last thing I had of Catherine's. If I'd lost her, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Margaret watched him go, feeling something shift in her chest, something that felt dangerous, something that felt like caring. Christmas Eve came quiet and cold. Margaret had spent the day cooking, throwing herself into preparation the way she always did when her thoughts got too loud. Roast beef, mashed potatoes, fresh bread, 3 different pies because she couldn't decide which one the men would like best, so she made them all. Emma toddled around the kitchen, getting underfoot and stealing bits of dough, her red gold curls bouncing as she laughed. The child had no memory of the terror that brought them here, no understanding of the danger that might still be coming. She was happy, safe, loved. Margaret's chest ached watching her. Dinner that night was louder than usual. The men brought small gifts, carved wooden toys for Emma, a horse from Tom, a doll from Danny, a set of blocks from Sam that he claimed he'd had lying around, but Margaret suspected he'd stayed up nights making. Emma squealed with delight, clutching each treasure like it was gold. Then Will stood, clearing his throat awkwardly. He held a package wrapped in brown paper. Miss Margaret, for the cold. She unwrapped it slowly. Inside was a wool shawl, thick and soft, the color of the sky just before sunset. It was the most beautiful thing she'd owned in 2 years. Mr. Thornton, I can't. This is too much. Wyoming winters are brutal. His voice was gruff. Can't have my cook freezing. But Margaret's hands were shaking, and she knew it had nothing to do with the cold. It was the first gift anyone had given her since John died. The first time in 18 months someone had thought of her comfort, her needs, her existence beyond what she could provide. Tears burned behind her eyes. She blinked them back fiercely. Thank you. Their eyes met across the table. The moment stretched, pulled taut like a wire about to snap. Something passed between them, something neither could name, something that felt like recognition. Will looked away first. Merry Christmas, Miss Hayes. Later, after the men had returned to the bunkhouse and Emma was asleep, Margaret stood by the window wrapped in her new shawl, watching snow fall in the darkness. Behind her, she heard Will enter the kitchen, heard him pause when he saw her. He crossed to stand beside her at the window, both of them staring out at the white world, neither speaking. Thank you, Margaret said again, softer this time, for everything, not just the shawl, for giving us a place, for not asking questions I can't answer. You'll answer them when you're ready. Will's shoulder was inches from hers. Or you won't. Either way, you're safe here. Am I? The question slipped out before she could stop it. Are any of us really safe? Will turned to look at her then, and Margaret found herself unable to look away. His face in the lamplight was all hard angles and old sorrows, but his eyes held something she'd almost forgotten existed. Kindness without conditions. Protection without ownership. As safe as I can make you, his voice was low. And I'm a stubborn man, Margaret Hayes. When I commit to something, I don't let go easy. The way he said her name made something flutter in her chest, something terrifying and wonderful at once. Merry Christmas, Will Thornton. It was the first time she'd used his first name. She saw him notice, saw something shift in his expression. Merry Christmas, Margaret. They stood together at the window while snow erased the world outside, and for a moment, just a moment, Margaret let herself believe in safety. The stranger arrived 2 days after Christmas. Margaret was in the chicken coop collecting eggs when she heard the hoofbeats. Something about the sound made her freeze, made her grip the basket so tight her knuckles went white. Through the slats of the coop, she watched a man dismount at the main house. He was well-dressed for this country, too well-dressed. Clean coat, polished boots, a hat that had never seen real work. Everything about him was wrong, wrong, wrong. He knocked on the kitchen door. Sam appeared from the barn, approaching the stranger with the casual alertness of a man who'd learned to be careful. Margaret couldn't hear the words, but she watched Sam's face, watched it stay neutral, unreadable. The stranger handed Sam something. a card. Then he remounted and rode away, and Margaret stayed frozen in the chicken coop until she couldn't see him anymore, until the hoofbeats faded into nothing. Her legs gave out. Sam found her there 10 minutes later, curled on the floor of the coop with smashed eggs around her, shaking like a leaf in a hurricane. Miss Margaret. Strong hands on her shoulders, a weathered face swimming into focus. Sam's eyes steady and calm. I need you to breathe. Can you do that? She tried, failed, tried again. Her whole body was locked in terror so profound it felt like drowning. Miss Margaret, look at me. Sam's voice was firm but gentle. You're safe. He's gone. He didn't find you. But the words wouldn't penetrate the panic. He found me. The words came out broken. He found me. He's going to come back, and he'll kill all of you and take Emma, and I can't. Sam helped her to her feet, steadying her when she swayed. Now I need you to tell me who he was and why he's looking for you. Because I just lied to a man for you, and I'd like to know what I'm mixed up in. Margaret's hands were still shaking. I can't. You can and you will. Sam's voice was firm, but not unkind. I've got good instinct for people, Miss Margaret. You're not a criminal. You're not a thief. But you're running from something, and that something just showed up at our door. Margaret looked toward the main house where she could see Emma's face pressed against the window, watching for her. Her daughter. Her life. Her reason for everything. His name is Richard Caldwell. The words felt like glass in her throat. He owns a boarding house in Riverside, Colorado. A mercantile. Half the town council, probably. And he wants me back. Sam was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. We need to tell Thornton, no. The word came out sharp. No, I'll handle this. I'll leave before I'll bring trouble here. You'll do no such thing. Sam's hand closed around her arm, not rough but firm. This is Thornton Ranch. We don't abandon our people. I'm not your people. I'm just the cook. Sam looked at her with something in his eyes that might have been affection, might have been respect. You became our people the moment boss carried you through that door. Like it or not, Miss Margaret, you're family now. And we protect family. That evening, Will took the news exactly as Margaret feared he would. They were in the kitchen, door locked for the first time since she'd arrived. Emma slept in her cradle, oblivious to the storm brewing around her. Richard Caldwell from Riverside. Will said the name like a curse. I've heard stories, none of them good. You know him, know of him. Will's jaw was tight. Enough to know you were right to run. Then you understand why I need to leave. Before he comes back with more men. Before someone gets hurt because of me. You're not leaving. Will's voice was flat, brooking no argument. You don't understand what he's capable of. Margaret's hands clenched in her lap. He has money. Connections. He can make legal problems disappear. He can make people disappear. Then we make sure you don't disappear. Will leaned forward, his elbows on the table. Tomorrow, Sam rides to Pine Ridge, gets Sheriff Morrison. We tell him everything. We make this official. The sheriff won't want a territorial dispute. It's easier to just let Caldwell take me back. Then we convince him otherwise. Will's eyes held hers. You're not alone anymore, Margaret. Whatever he sends, we face it together. Why? The question burst out of her. Why risk everything for a woman you just met? Will was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough with something she couldn't name. Because you remind me what it feels like to be alive. And I'm not ready to lose that again. The letter arrived the next afternoon. Sam brought it in with the rest of the mail from town, his face grim as he handed it to Will. The envelope was expensive, cream-colored, with Margaret's name written in an elegant hand. Margaret opened it with steady fingers, read aloud. My dearest Margaret, I hope this finds you well. I'm writing to inform you that your debt has now grown to $700, including interest and the considerable expense of tracking you across 3 territories. However, I am a reasonable man. If you return to Riverside willingly within 1 week, I am prepared to forgive the debt entirely. I'm sure we can come to an arrangement that satisfies us both. You have 7 days to reply. After that, I will be forced to pursue more direct methods of collection. Yours in Christian fellowship, Richard Caldwell. Silence fell over the kitchen. 1 week, Tom said finally. What happens in 1 week, he comes himself. Margaret folded the letter carefully, her face blank. Or he sends men who don't care about being nice. Let him come. Will's voice was granite. We'll be ready. ready for what Margaret's voice rose. Armed men. Caldwell has money resources, probably has the law on his side. Then we get the law on our side. Will stood energy crackling off him like electricity before a storm. Sam, ride into town tomorrow. Talk to Sheriff Morrison. Tell him what's happening. I want everything documented. Sheriff might not want to get involved in another territory's business. Sam's voice was cautious. Then we make him want to. Will turned to Margaret. You've been threatened. Your child's been threatened. That's our business now. Sam nodded and left. Tom and Danny followed, leaving Will and Margaret alone in the kitchen, with Emma sleeping peacefully between them. You're planning to fight him? Margaret said quietly. Actually fight him. I'm planning to make him sorry he ever heard my name. Will moved to stand in front of her, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. But I need to know something first. What do you want to stay? His voice was intense. Not stay because you're running out of options. Not stay because you're too scared to leave. Stay because you want to. Because this place means something to you. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice dropped even lower. Because I mean something to you, Margaret's breath caught. She thought about the past 2 weeks. The kitchen that had become her domain. The men who tipped their hats and called her ma'am with genuine respect. Emma's first real steps on this floor, laughing as she tumbled into Margaret's arms. Will's hand on her cheek that night, rough and gentle at the same time. Yes, the word came out barely a whisper. I want to stay. Something shifted in Will's face. Something that looked almost like joy. Then you stay, and we fight. And God help anyone who tries to take you from here. He reached for her hand, and Margaret let him take it. Let herself feel the warmth of his palm against hers, the strength of his fingers wrapping around her own. Outside, the wind howled across the frozen prairie. Somewhere in Colorado, a man named Richard Caldwell was planning his next move. But here in this kitchen that smelled of bread and coffee and wood smoke, Margaret Hayes felt something she hadn't felt in 2 years. She felt like she might actually win. Back in the bedroom in 1920, William Thornton's voice had faded to almost nothing. Henry leaned close, holding his grandfather's frail hand. Grandpa Will's eyes opened slowly. So tired, Henry. So tired. Rest. We can finish tomorrow. No tomorrow. Will's grip tightened with surprising strength. You leave for camp in 2 days. You need to hear the rest. But you need to rest. I'll rest soon enough. Will's smile was sad. Your grandmother's waiting for me, boy. Been waiting 3 years. But first I need you to understand what happened next. His eyes drifted closed again, and for a moment Henry thought he'd fallen asleep. Then the old voice came again, softer but determined. 6 days, Henry. We had 6 days before Caldwell came. 6 days to prepare. 6 days before everything changed. The nurse appeared in the doorway, concern on her face. Mr. Thornton, you really should rest. Will waved her off weakly. The boy needs this. He's going to war. The nurse looked at Henry, who nodded. She sighed and withdrew. Will's breathing was labored now, each word an effort. What happened in those 6 days, what your grandmother did, it's the part of the story that matters most. Because that's when the scared woman who collapsed in my snow became the warrior who saved us all. His voice dropped to barely a whisper. That's when Margaret Hayes stopped running and started fighting. And God help me, Henry, watching her find that strength was like watching the sun rise after the longest night of your life. Outside, the March snow continued to fall, and in a small room in Wyoming, an old man prepared to tell his grandson how love and courage had changed everything 46 years ago. The clock in the bedroom ticked toward midnight. Will's breathing had grown more labored, each inhalation a battle his body was slowly losing. Henry sat forward in his chair, still holding his grandfather's hand, afraid to let go, afraid that releasing that grip would mean releasing everything. Grandpa, maybe we should stop. You need your strength. Will's eyes opened, clouded but fierce. Strength for what, boy? I'm dying. Been dying for months. The doctors told me last fall I wouldn't see spring. Henry felt his chest tighten. You never said. Didn't need to. Will's voice was barely audible. But you're leaving for war in 2 days. And before you go, you need to understand what real battle looks like. Not the kind with guns and trenches. The kind where you fight for what matters most. His hand tightened weakly on Henry's. Did you love her? Henry asked quietly. Right away, Will's smile was short and distant. Love's too simple a word for what I felt. I was terrified of her. of what she made me feel, of the way she'd walked into my dead life and somehow brought it back to breathing. Why terrified? Because caring meant I could lose again. Will's eyes closed, and I'd spent 11 years making sure I never cared about anything, making sure nothing could hurt me the way losing Catherine had hurt me. He coughed a wet sound that made Henry reach for the water glass. Will drank carefully, then settled back against the pillows. But Margaret didn't give me a choice. She walked into my life, carrying death in her arms, and somehow impossibly brought everything back to life. She was fierce and broken and more brave than any soldier I'd known. And she was about to show us all what courage really looked like. Will's breathing evened out slightly, finding rhythm in memory. 6 days, Henry. We had 6 days to prepare for Caldwell. And in those 6 days, your grandmother revealed who she really was, what she was really capable of. And I fell in love with her so completely that it terrified me more than any threat Caldwell could make. The room faded, the present dissolved, and Will's voice carried them both back to January 1875, to the days when everything hung in balance. January 2nd, 1875. 3 days after the letter arrived, 4 days before Caldwell's deadline. Sheriff Morrison rode out from Pine Ridge that morning, his horse picking careful steps through snow that had fallen fresh overnight. He was a lean man, 52 years old, with a face weathered by too many years, watching people hurt each other in ways the law couldn't always stop. Sam met him at the gate, and Will came out from the barn where he'd been checking ammunition stores. They gathered in the kitchen, Margaret standing with her arms crossed, while Emma played with wooden blocks near the hearth, oblivious to the tension crackling through the room. "Tell me everything," Morrison said, pulling out a small leather notebook. Margaret told her story again. The words came easier now, worn smooth by repetition, but the shame and fear underneath them never quite faded. Denver, John's death, Caldwell's boarding house, the trap, the growing debt, the proposition, the assault, the 13 months of running. Morrison took notes without interruption. When she finished, he sat back and studied her face. "Caldwell's got a reputation." His voice was measured. "Even out here in Wyoming, we've heard stories. But reputation isn't evidence, Miss Hayes. He threatened her." Will's voice was tight. "He sent men after her. He's demanding money she doesn't owe. He sent letters and inquiries." Morrison held up a hand. "Which is technically legal. Making business inquiries about someone who owes you money is not a crime. So you won't help?" Margaret's voice was flat. "I didn't say that." Morrison turned to her. "I'll send telegrams to Riverside. Check if Caldwell has any outstanding warrants, any official complaints against him. But Miss Hayes, I need you to understand something. This might take time. And from what you've told me, time is something you don't have much of. 4 days." Sam spoke from his position by the door. 4 days until he said he'd come for her. "Then I suggest you prepare." Morrison stood, settling his hat on his head. "If Caldwell shows up here and makes any direct threats, any attempt to take Miss Hayes by force, that's when I can act. Until then, my hands are tied by jurisdiction and law." After he left, silence settled over the kitchen like fresh snow. Margaret stared at the table, hands clenched in her lap. Will watched her, saw the defeat creeping into her shoulders. "It's not enough." Her voice was barely audible. "It's something." Will sat across from her. "And we have other advantages." "Like what?" "Like 6 men who know this land better than any hired guns Caldwell could bring." Will leaned forward. "Like a ranch built for defense. Open approaches, clear sight lines. Like the fact that Caldwell doesn't know what he's walking into." "What do you mean?" "I mean he expects you to be alone. Vulnerable, easy to take." Will's voice hardened. "He doesn't expect a fight, so we give him one. We give him more than that. We give him a reason to regret ever hearing your name." Over the next 3 days, Thornton Ranch transformed into something resembling a fortress. Will moved through preparations with the efficiency of a man who'd learned military tactics in another life before cattle and grief became his whole world. He spread maps across the kitchen table, marking fields of fire and defensive positions with calm precision. Tom would take the barn loft elevated position with clear views of the main approach road. Danny at the bunkhouse protecting the horses and covering the eastern flank. Sam with Will at the main house, the last line of defense for Margaret and Emma. Rifles were loaded and positioned in every building. Ammunition counted and distributed. Lines of retreat planned if things went badly. And through it all, Will taught Margaret to shoot. They stood behind the barn in the brittle cold of early morning breath pluming white in the air. Will placed his Colt 45 in her hands, then stepped behind her to adjust her grip. Hold it firm but not tight. His hands covered hers, warm despite the cold. Like you're holding something precious. Something you don't want to hurt but need to protect. Margaret felt the weight of the gun cold and heavy and deadly. Felt the warmth of Will's body behind her solid and steady. His breath stirred her hair as he spoke. Steady your breathing. In, out. Let it find rhythm. Squeeze the trigger. Don't pull. Gentle pressure until it surprises you. She sighted down the barrel at the target Tom had set up a circle painted on a board propped against a fence post. Breathed in, out, squeezed. The gun roared and kicked against her palms. The board splintered dead center. Will stepped back, staring. Have you shot before once? Wow. Margaret lowered the gun hand steady. When I had to, what happened and I missed? She turned to look at him. On purpose, their eyes met and held. Understanding passed between them, the kind that needed no words. She'd had a gun before. She'd faced a threat before. And she'd chosen mercy when she could have chosen violence. But you won't miss this time. Will's voice was quiet. If Caldwell comes. No, Margaret's jaw tightened. This time I won't miss. This time I won't show mercy to a man who showed none to me. Will took the gun from her hands, his fingers brushing hers. That's when I knew he would tell Henry decades later. That's when I understood she was more dangerous than Caldwell expected. More dangerous than I expected. She wasn't just a victim anymore. She was a woman who'd been pushed past breaking and come out the other side made of steel. The night before Caldwell's deadline, Margaret couldn't sleep. She paced the kitchen while Emma slept peacefully in her cradle, while the ranch settled into quiet around her. Every sound made her jump. Every creak of wood, every whistle of wind felt like threat approaching. Will found her there past midnight, staring out the window into darkness. You should be resting. Can't. She didn't turn around. Keep thinking about tomorrow. About what happens if Morrison can't help. If Caldwell brings too many men. If something goes wrong. Will crossed to stand beside her at the window. Both of them looking out at the frozen world, neither touching but aware of every inch of space between them. Then we handle it. His voice was calm. Same way we've handled everything else. Together. You keep saying that word. Margaret's voice shook slightly. Together, like it's simple. Like it means something. It does mean something. Will turned to face her and Margaret found herself unable to look away. To me, it means you're not alone anymore. It means whatever comes, I'm standing beside you. It means I'll die before I let anyone hurt you or Emma. Don't. The word came out sharp. Don't promise things you can't control. I can control what I do, what I choose. Will's hand came up slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, he touched her cheek with careful fingers. And I choose this. I choose you. Margaret felt tears burn behind her eyes. Why? Why risk everything for us? Will was quiet for a long moment. Because you remind me what it feels like to be alive. Because when I carried you into this house, something in me that had been dead for 11 years woke up. Because watching you fight, watching you refuse to break, it's like watching the sun rise after the longest night. His thumb brushed away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. I'm falling in love with you, Margaret Hayes. And that terrifies me more than anything Caldwell could do. Margaret's breath caught. She should pull away. Should protect herself. Should remember that caring meant losing, and she'd lost so much already. But she didn't pull away. I'm scared. The admission felt like tearing something open. I'm so scared, Will. Not just of Caldwell. Of this. Of feeling something real for the first time since John died. Of letting myself hope. Good. Will's voice was rough. Fear keeps us sharp. But Margaret, you don't have to hope alone anymore. Whatever happens tomorrow, we face it together. She let herself lean into him then just for a moment. Let his arms come around her, solid and warm and safe. Let herself feel protected without feeling owned. Let herself believe just briefly that maybe hope wasn't foolish. Together, she whispered against his chest. Together. They stood at the window while the clock ticked toward deadline, and for a brief moment, the world felt almost peaceful. January 5th, 1875. The day Caldwell said he would come. But morning came quiet. Noon passed without incident. The afternoon stretched long and tense, every man on high alert, every sound scrutinized for threat. By evening, Margaret had convinced herself he wasn't coming after all, that the letter had been bluff, that Caldwell had reconsidered, that maybe impossibly they were safe. Then Sam went to break ice on the water trough, and everything changed. The sound of the scream brought them all running. Margaret reached the barn first, bursting through the door to find Sam on the ground, his right leg twisted at an angle that made her stomach lurch. Danny and Tom were already there, faces white with shock. The bone was visible through torn pants, a compound fracture white against red. Sam's face was gray with pain, sweat pouring despite the cold. His breath came in gasps, punctuated by groans he couldn't quite suppress. "What happened?" Will skidded to a stop beside them. "Horse spooked." Sam's voice was tight. "Rattlesnake under the snow. Threw me into the fence post." Margaret was already moving, her mind shifting into a mode she tried to forget she possessed. "Get him inside. Kitchen table. Now, ma'am." Tom started. "Now." The command in her voice brooked no argument. "Danny, I need boiling water, clean cloths, whiskey, and something leather he can bite on." Tom helped Will carry him, move fast but careful. The men exchanged glances, then obeyed. They got Sam onto the kitchen table, his screams echoing off the walls as a movement jarred the broken bone. Margaret pushed Emma's cradle into the far corner, then returned to stand over Sam, her face composed and focused in a way none of them had seen before. "What are you doing?" Will's voice was tight. "Saving his leg." Margaret began rolling up her sleeves. "That bone needs to be set in the next hour, or he loses the leg to infection or improper healing. We can't wait 6 hours for a doctor from Pine Ridge." "Ma'am, you can't." Danny's face was pale. "That's surgery. That's doctor work." Margaret's hands stilled. She looked up at Will, and in her eyes he saw something that answered questions he'd been asking since she saved Bella. Something that explained skills no simple cook should possess. Something that made him understand just how much she'd been hiding. "My father wasn't a farrier." Her voice was steady. "He was a doctor. Battlefield surgeon for the Union Army. My mother was a nurse. I grew up in Pennsylvania hospital. I was suturing wounds at 12 years old. Assisting surgeries at 15. The kitchen went silent except for Sam's labored breathing. "You lied." Will's voice was flat. "I survived." Margaret turned back to Sam. "There's a difference. Now I need to know if you trust me to do this, because once I start, I can't stop halfway." Sam looked up at her through pain-glazed eyes. "Do it. Whatever you have to do, ma'am, just do it." Tom and Danny hold him down. Margaret's hands moved with sudden decisiveness. "Will, I need you at his shoulders. When I pull that bone, he's going to fight. You have to hold him steady, or I could make it worse." Will moved into position, hands on Sam's shoulders. Margaret poured whiskey over the wound, and Sam's scream tore through the house. Then she was feeling along the fracture with careful fingers, her face intent. "Clean break. Thank God. Both tibia and fibula." She looked up at the men holding Sam. "On 3. Don't let him move no matter what. 1, 2, 3. She pulled. The sound of bone grinding against bone would haunt all of them for years. Sam's scream went beyond human, became pure animal agony. His body convulsed, trying to escape the pain, but the men held firm. The bone clicked into place with a sound like a branch snapping. Margaret moved immediately, packing the wound with a clean cloth splinting, with boards wrapping tight with strips torn from sheets. Her hands were steady, professional, completely focused. Within 10 minutes, the leg was immobilized. The bleeding controlled. Sam passed out from pain, but breathing steady. She stepped back, her hands covered in blood, and looked up at Will. He was staring at her like he'd never seen her before. "Where did you really learn that?" His voice was quiet, dangerous in its control. Margaret turned to wash blood from her hands in the basin, buying time to think, to decide how much truth to tell. "Philadelphia," she spoke without turning around. "I was born Margaret Ann Hayes. My father was Dr. Robert Hayes, battlefield surgeon. My mother was Sarah Hayes, Irish immigrant, who worked as a nurse. I grew up surrounded by medicine, by broken bodies and desperate measures, by the understanding that sometimes you do what needs doing regardless of what society thinks women should be capable of." She turned to face them, chin raised, defiant. "During the war, I volunteered with my mother in the nurse corps. I saw hundreds die. Saw my father perform surgeries under conditions that would make this look sterile. When he came home in 1865, he taught me everything he knew, said if he died, someone needed to carry on the knowledge. And your husband Will's voice was still carefully controlled. John, a good man, simple, kind. Margaret's voice softened. He never knew. Nobody knew except my parents, because women who know medicine are called witches. Unnatural, dangerous. So I learned to hide what I could do, learned to be small and quiet and just skilled enough to be useful but not threatening. Until today. We'll step closer. Until you just performed field surgery like you've done it 100 times before. Because I have. Margaret met his eyes. I've set bones and sutured wounds and delivered breaches and diagnosed fevers. I've held dying soldiers and saved impossible cases and learned that mercy sometimes means making hard choices. She gestured to Sam, unconscious but stable. So yes, I lied about my father. I lied about what I know, because telling the truth has only ever brought me trouble. Will stared at her for a long moment. Then he crossed to where she stood, his boots leaving bloody footprints on the floor. Who are you really, Margaret Hayes? I'm someone who learned that survival means being more than people expect. Margaret's voice shook slightly. I'm the daughter of a man who believed women were as smart as men. I'm a widow who's been running so long, I almost forgot I used to stand and fight. I'm a mother who will do absolutely anything to protect her child. She looked up at Priam and Will saw tears threatening in those storm cloud eyes. And I'm tired, so tired of hiding and lying and pretending to be less than I am. But that's what the world requires of women like me. So that's what I do. Silence settled between them. Then Will's hand came up, cupped her blood-stained cheek with gentle fingers. You don't have to hide here. His voice was rough. You don't have to be less than you are. Not with me. Margaret felt something crack inside her chest. Don't make me hope when tomorrow Caldwell might destroy everything. Then tonight we hope. Tomorrow we fight. Will pulled her close and Margaret let herself collapse against him. Let herself be held. Let herself be seen, fully seen for the first time since her father died. Behind them, Sam groaned softly in morphine sleep. Emma babbled from her corner. An outside night settled over the ranch with the weight of things waiting to happen. Later that night, with Sam sleeping fitfully in Will's bed and the other men in the bunkhouse, Margaret and Will sat at the kitchen table with cold coffee. Neither of them was drinking. Tell me the rest. Will's voice was quiet. All of it. No more secrets. So Margaret told him. Philadelphia in her childhood, growing up in hospital wards, while other girls learned embroidery. Her father teaching her anatomy from medical texts, her mother showing her how to change dressings and recognize infection. The war years, volunteering at 16, seeing men die from wounds that should have been survivable, if only someone had known what to do. Her father surviving the war only to die 6 months later from typhoid contracted from a patient. Her mother following 3 months after that consumption eating her lungs. Margaret at 17, orphaned, educated far beyond what any employer wanted in a woman. Moving to Denver at 19, hiding her knowledge working as a seamstress, meeting John Hayes, a simple miner who was kind and gentle and asked nothing of her except that she let him love her. Their quiet happiness, his death in the mine collapse, her pregnancy, Emma's difficult birth that Margaret had delivered herself because no doctor would come for a poor widow, and then Caldwell. She told Will all of it, the complete truth, holding nothing back. When she finished, Dawn was threatening at the windows, and Will's hand had found hers across the table, at some point holding tight. I'm sorry, his voice was thick. For all of it. For every loss, every fear, every moment you had to hide. Don't be sorry, Margaret squeezed his hand. Just promise me something. Anything, if tomorrow goes badly. If Caldwell has too many men. If it looks like he's going to win. She took a shaking breath. Promise me you'll take Emma and run. Don't try to save me. Just save her. Will's jaw tightened. No, Will, no. He stood, came around the table, pulled her up to face him. I'm not choosing between you. I'm not losing either of you. We fight together or we don't fight at all. That's not practical. That's not smart thinking when a child's life is at stake. I don't care. Will's hands framed her face, forcing her to meet his eyes. I'm in love with you, Margaret. Completely terrifyingly in love with you. And I'm not watching you sacrifice yourself. Not for me, not for anyone. Margaret felt tears spill over. You barely know me. I know enough. I know you're brave and fierce and more capable than any woman I've ever met. I know you saved my foreman's leg. I know you stand up when everything says to fall down. I know that when I'm with you, I remember what it felt like to have a future worth looking toward. He kissed her, then soft and desperate and full of everything they were both too scared to say. Margaret kissed him back, her hands fisting in his shirt, pulling him closer. This was reckless. This was dangerous. This was everything she'd promised herself she wouldn't do. But she'd already fallen, and falling felt like flying. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Will rested his forehead against hers. After tomorrow, when we've won, when Caldwell's gone, he paused. Marry me. Margaret's breath hitched. What marry me? Be my wife. Let Emma be my daughter. Let me give you both the protection of my name and the safety of this ranch and everything I have. Will, that's not. You don't have to do that just because we. She gestured helplessly between them. I'm not asking because of that, though God knows I want that too. Will's smile was crooked. I'm asking because I can't imagine my life without you in it anymore. Because I've been half dead for 11 years and you brought me back to living. Because I love you and Emma and I want the whole world to know you're mine and I'm yours. Margaret opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was too much, too fast, too impossibly good to be real. You don't have to answer now. Will's thumbs brushed away her tears. Just think about it. Think about a future where you're not running anymore, where you have a home and a family and someone who will stand beside you through everything. Yes, the word escaped before she could stop it. When this is over, yes. Will's face transformed joy, replacing the perpetual shadow of grief she'd grown accustomed to seeing there. Yes, yes, Margaret laughed through tears. You're crazy, and I'm crazy, and this is the worst timing possible. But yes, when Caldwell's gone, I'll marry you. They kissed again, sealing the promise. And for a moment, standing in the kitchen with dawn breaking outside, Margaret let herself believe in happy endings. Then she felt the familiar wave of nausea and had to pull away, hand over her mouth. Margaret Will steadied her. What's wrong? Nothing. Everything. Margaret took deep breaths, fighting down the sickness. There's something else you need to know. Are you ill? No. She looked up at him, saw the concern in his eyes, the love that still felt impossible. I'm pregnant. The words hung between them like smoke. Will stared at her. Pregnant, about 6 weeks, maybe 7. Margaret's hand moved to her still flat stomach. It happened that first week, I think, when we stopped being careful after Christmas. Will's face went through a dozen emotions in as many seconds. Shock, fear, that old grief for Catherine and the baby they'd lost. Then something else, something that looked almost like wonder. A baby. His voice was hoarse. We're having a baby, if you still want. If this changes things about the proposal, I understand. You've already lost so much in childbirth, and I wouldn't blame you if you couldn't face that again. Will pulled her close so tight she could barely breathe. It doesn't change anything. It makes me more determined to end Caldwell. More determined to build that future. He pulled back enough to look at her face. You're having my baby. We're having a baby, Margaret corrected. If you're sure, if you can handle the risk. Catherine died because we didn't know she had a weak heart. Will's voice was firm. You're a doctor's daughter. You know your body, you know the risks, and I'm not losing you, either of you. Not to Caldwell, not to childbirth, not to anything. He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. We're going to win tomorrow. We're going to send Caldwell running, and then we're going to get married and have this baby and build a life that's bigger than everything we've lost. Margaret wanted to believe him, wanted to let hope take root, but she learned too well that hope was dangerous. That happy endings were for other people, still standing in Will's arms with dawn breaking and their impossible future stretching ahead. She let herself hope anyway. Back in 1920, Will's voice had grown so weak, Henry had to lean close to hear. She was pregnant, Grandpa. During all of this, Will's smile was soft with memory. 6 weeks along when she told me. 3 months when Caldwell came. She testified in court at 6 months. Had your Uncle Thomas 2 months after Caldwell's trial. Henry shook his head in wonder. She was brave. She was terrified. Will's eyes closed. But she fought anyway. That's what real courage is, Henry. Not the absence of fear, acting despite it. Choosing to stand when running would be easier. His breathing had grown more labored. The nurse appeared in the doorway again, her face grave. Mr. Thornton, I really must insist. 5 more minutes. Will's hand tightened on Henry's. The boy needs to hear how it ended. Needs to know what his grandmother did. The nurse hesitated, then nodded and withdrew. Will's eyes opened, finding Henry's face. January 7th, 1875. Caldwell came at noon. Brought 5 men with him, all armed. Rode up to our ranch like he owned it. Like your grandmother was property he'd come to collect. His voice dropped even lower. But she walked out to meet him. Pregnant with my child, knowing he could kill us all. And she stood her ground, stood tall, and showed that bastard what it meant to face someone who'd stopped being afraid. The old man's face was pale, his breathing shallow, but his eyes held fire, remembering. That's the woman you need to know about Henry, not the grandmother who baked cookies and told stories. The warrior who stared down death and said no more. That's who you come from. That's the blood in your veins. Will's eyes drifted closed. Tomorrow, I'll tell you the rest. How she saved us all. How justice came. How love won. Grandpa. Henry's voice broke. Tomorrow might be too late. Then tonight. Will's whisper was almost inaudible. Tonight, I'll tell you how it ended. How your grandmother became a legend. How we built our life from ashes and fear and impossible courage. Outside, the March snow fell heavier, and in a small room in Wyoming, an old man held tight to his grandson's hand and prepared to finish the story that had defined his life. The bedroom had grown cold. Henry realized he'd been sitting frozen, listening to his grandfather's labored breathing for nearly an hour. The nurse had checked twice more, each time her face more worried, but Will had waved her away with surprising force. I need to finish this. The old man's voice was thread thin. Before I go, he needs to know. Henry squeezed his grandfather's hand. I'm here, Grandpa. I'm listening. Will's eyes opened, clouded but determined. January 7th. The day everything came to a head. The day your grandmother stopped running and became something else entirely. He coughed a wet, rattling sound. Henry held the water glass to his lips, patient while he drank. 5 riders came at noon. Will's voice strengthened slightly, drawing on reserves that shouldn't have existed. Richard Caldwell at the head, dressed like he was going to Sunday service instead of coming to destroy lives. 4 men with him, hired guns with cold eyes and empty consciences. The old man's hand tightened on Henry's. We were ready, Tom in the barn loft, Danny at the bunkhouse, Sam at the window with his splinted leg and a rifle. Me and your grandmother on the porch. His smile was ghost-like. She was 3 months pregnant by then, barely showing, but I knew. God, I knew, and I was terrified. But she walked out to face him like she was walking into battle, like she'd been born for that exact moment. Will's eyes closed, but his voice continued steady, now lost in memory. That's when I understood what courage really looked like, Henry. Not absence of fear, not even acting despite fear, but choosing to stand when every instinct screams to run, choosing fight when flight would be so much easier. His breathing evened as the story took him. Back to 1875, back to the moment that changed everything. January 7th, 1875, high noon though the sun was weak through winter clouds. Margaret stood on the porch beside Will, her spine straight, her chin raised. Inside, Emma was with Tom's wife, who'd come to help, blissfully unaware that death was riding toward them across the frozen prairie. 5 riders. Margaret counted them, automatically cataloging threat the way her father had taught her during the war. 1 man in front, expensive coat, confident posture. The other 4 flanking him, hands near weapons, eyes scanning for resistance. Richard Caldwell. Even after 18 months of running, after all the miles and fear and desperate escapes, seeing him again made Margaret's stomach clench. He looked exactly as she remembered. Heavy-set, well-fed prosperity radiating from every line of his body. The kind of man who'd never known hunger or desperation or what it meant to have nothing. He pulled up his horse 20 feet from the porch and surveyed the scene with an expression of mild amusement. Mrs. Hayes, his voice was cultured, pleasant, as if they were meeting at a social gathering instead of a standoff. You look well. Wyoming agrees with you. Margaret felt Will tense beside her, but forced her own voice to remain steady. Mr. Caldwell, You wasted a trip. Come now, Margaret. His smile widened. We had an arrangement. You left rather abruptly. I left because you assaulted me. Caldwell's expression flickered something ugly, showing beneath the polished surface before he smoothed it away. Assaulted, my dear, I offered you marriage, an honorable solution to your legitimate debt, a debt you invented. Margaret stepped forward and she felt Will's hand brush hers, steadying without restraining. Every dollar was fabricated. Every charge was false. You trapped me the way you've trapped dozens of other women. Caldwell's face darkened. Witnesses say otherwise. Room and board for over a year, medical care, food, shelter. $700 is quite reasonable under the circumstances. Will move forward, then putting himself slightly in front of Margaret. She owes you nothing. This is my property. Leave. Caldwell turned his attention to Will, for the first time assessing him with the cold calculation of a man used to measuring threats. And you are William Thornton. This is my ranch. She works for me. She's under my protection. Protection. Caldwell's smile turned mocking. How much does she owe you, Mr. Thornton, or is it a different sort of arrangement? The insult hung in the cold air. Margaret felt Will's rage like heat radiating from a stove, but he held position, hands steady. Don't. Margaret stepped up beside him. He wants you to threaten him, wants witnesses, wants to claim assault so he can bring the law down on us. Smart girl. Caldwell's voice dripped condescension. Always were, that's why I chose you. Such a waste of intelligence in someone so determined to be difficult. Margaret's hands clenched at her sides. You didn't choose me. You trapped me like an animal. Used my desperation against me. Made me believe I had no choice but you. I gave you everything. Caldwell's mask was slipping now, rage bleeding through. You were nothing, a pregnant widow with nowhere to go, no prospects, no future. I saved you. You imprisoned me. Margaret's voice rose. You invented debts I couldn't pay. You threatened my child. You tried to force me into marriage through coercion and fear. I offered you security. Caldwell was shouting now, all pretense of civility gone. I offered you a place in my home, my bed, my life, and you ran like a common thief because that's what I am to you, isn't it? Margaret stepped down from the porch, moving into open ground. Property, something to own, something to control. Well, I'm not yours, I never was. She could see Caldwell's face purpling with fury, could see his men shifting nervously, hands moving toward weapons, could feel the moment balancing on a knife edge. Jacob, Caldwell turned to one of his men. Patrick, get her, we're leaving. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. Then one of the men, the one Caldwell had called Jacob, shook his head. No, sir. Caldwell spun. What did you say? I said no. Jacob's voice was quiet but firm. You told me we were collecting a debt. You didn't say anything about dragging a woman away by force. You work for me. Caldwell's voice was venomous. Worked. Past tense. Jacob reached up and unpinned something from his vest. A badge. He tossed it to the ground between them. I'm done. The other men were exchanging glances now. Uncertainty rippling through their formation. Margaret watched it happen, watched Caldwell's perfect plan begin to fracture. I'll double your pay. Caldwell was losing control. Desperation making his voice shrill. Triple, just get her and let's go. No, Jacob turned his horse slightly, positioning himself between Caldwell and Margaret. I've done a lot of things for money, Mr. Caldwell, but I'm not dragging pregnant women across territories for you. Margaret felt the world tilt. He knew. Somehow this stranger knew. Patrick. Caldwell turned to another of his men. You want double pay? The man called Patrick looked at Margaret at the ranch with its defensive positions at Jacob, who just defected. His jaw worked. Boss, maybe we should just go. This isn't worth getting killed over. Cowards, Caldwell screamed. All of you are cowards. That's when the rifle shot cracked across the frozen air. Sam's bullet punched through Caldwell's hat, sending it flying. The man's scream was high and terrified as his horse reared. He clung to the saddle, all dignity gone reduced to pure survival instinct. Next one's through your skull, Sam's voice boomed from the window. Tom appeared in the barn loft, rifle leveled. Danny at the bunkhouse, shotgun ready. The ranch had become a fortress. Every position covered, every angle of fire controlled. Caldwell fought his spooked horse, finally getting it under control. His face was white with shock and fury. This isn't over. His voice shook. I'll come back with the law, with marshals, with enough men to burn this place to the ground. Come back. Margaret's voice was cold steady. She raised the pistol Will had given her, the one she'd practiced with every morning for a week, aimed it at Caldwell with hands that didn't shake. Give me a reason. For a long moment, they stared at each other. Predator and prey reversed. Hunter become hunted. Then Caldwell yanked his horse's head around. Fall back. Fall back. His remaining men fled. Patrick, the other two. They scattered like leaves before wind, and Caldwell went with them, clinging to his horse, all pretense of dignity abandoned. At the property line, he turned back one last time. This isn't over, Margaret. I'll be back. You'll pay for this. Margaret lowered the gun. Her voice when it came was soft, but carried clearly across the distance. No, Richard. You will. He rode away. The sound of hoofbeats faded into silence. Margaret stood in the snow for a long moment, the gun heavy in her hand. Then her legs gave out. Will caught her before she hit the ground, his arms solid and warm and real. I've got you. His voice was rough. You're safe. It's over. Is it? Margaret's whole body was shaking now, adrenaline crash hitting like a physical blow. He said he'd come back. He said he'd bring more men. Let him try. Will held her tight. We'll be ready. But the man Jacob. Margaret pulled back enough to look at Will's face. Why did he help us? As if summoned by his name, Jacob approached on foot, leading his horse. He moved slowly, hands visible, non-threatening. When he was 10 feet away, he stopped. Ma'am, his voice was rough, scarred by tobacco or old injury. I'm sorry, I didn't know what Caldwell was. I just needed work. Margaret studied him. 35 maybe, hard-faced but not cruel, eyes that had seen too much and were tired of it. Tell me about your sister, she heard herself say. Jacob's face went still. How did you know? The way you looked at me, like you were seeing someone else. Someone you couldn't save. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he sat down in the snow, like his legs wouldn't hold him anymore. Anne Sullivan, 22 years old, came to Caldwell's boarding house in 1871. Widow pregnant, nowhere to go. Stories sound familiar. Margaret felt ice in her stomach. Yes, he told her the same things he told you. Trapped her the same way. When she tried to leave in 1872, he had her arrested for theft. Said she stole jewelry. She died in jail 3 months later. Officially from fever. But when I saw her body, she had bruises everywhere. They beat her for trying to escape. His voice broke. I was too late to save her, but I swore I'd get evidence. I got a job with Caldwell. Spent 2 years collecting proof, watching for someone brave enough to use it. What kind of proof? Will's voice was sharp. Jacob stood and went to his saddlebag, pulled out a leather satchel and handed it to Will. Ledgers, real ones and forged ones. Letters with threats. Testimonies from 3 other women who escaped. Everything you'd need to destroy him in court. Why didn't you go to the law yourself? Margaret's voice shook. Riverside Sheriff is Caldwell's cousin. Jacob's smile was bitter. And a man's testimony against his employer. Worthless, but you, ma'am, you have standing. You can press charges, and now I can corroborate everything. Sheriff Morrison appeared then riding hard from town, attracted by the gunshots. When he heard the story, saw Jacob's evidence, his face went grim. This changes things. He flipped through the ledger. This is enough to bring charges, real charges. But Mrs. Hayes, you'll have to testify in court. In Cheyenne, probably, since Caldwell has too much influence in Riverside. When Margaret's voice was steady, February Circuit Court. Morrison looked at her carefully. That's 3 weeks. Can you do it? Face him in court with all of this? Margaret looked at Will, at the ranch that had become home, at Emma playing safe inside, at the future she'd promised herself she could have. Yes, her hand moved unconsciously to her belly where new life grew. Not just for me, for all the women he's hurt, for Anne, for everyone who couldn't fight back. Then we find the others. Jacob's voice was quiet. I know where 5 more survivors are. If we can bring them together, testify as a group. Caldwell won't be able to claim it's just one woman's lies. How long to find them? Will asked. Week, maybe less. Jacob met Margaret's eyes. If you're willing to travel, if you're willing to risk Caldwell finding you while we're on the road, then we leave tomorrow. Margaret's voice was firm. We find them all. We bring them to Cheyenne, and we end this. The journey took 10 days. 10 days of riding through brutal cold, of staying in cheap boarding houses that reminded Margaret too viscerally of Caldwell's place of knocking on doors and convincing traumatized women to dredge up their worst memories. Will insisted on coming despite the ranch needing him. Where you go, I go. That was the deal. Sam could manage with his healing leg and the other men. They found Hannah Barrett first in Denver, 40 years old, working as a seamstress in a tiny apartment that smelled of loneliness. She opened her door and saw Margaret's face, and something in her expression crumpled. You're her, the one who got away and came back. Margaret stood in the hallway, very aware of how she looked. Travel-worn, showing her pregnancy now at 3 months exhaustion, written in every line of her body. I need your help to stop him, to make sure he never hurts anyone else. Hannah stared at her for a long moment. Then her eyes moved to Margaret's belly. You're carrying a child, and you're doing this because of the child. Margaret's hand moved to her stomach. So she never has to be afraid the way we were. Hannah stepped aside. Come in. Tell me everything. Ruth Morrison was next in Laramie, Sheriff Morrison's distant cousin, which explained why he'd been helping. She'd been trapped from 1869 to 1872, had escaped by marrying a rancher who'd offered her protection. He died in 1874, leaving her vulnerable again. If I testify, Caldwell will come after me. Ruth's hands shook as she poured tea. I'm alone now. I have nothing to defend myself with. You have us. Will spoke for the first time. Everyone who testifies, I'm offering protection. Jobs on my ranch if you need them. A place to go if Caldwell tries revenge. Ruth studied him. You do that for strangers. You're not strangers. Margaret took Ruth's hand. We're survivors of the same monster. That makes us family. Ruth agreed. Beth Carter in Cheyenne was harder. She was 31 but looked 50, aged by fear and trauma. She worked in a laundry, kept her head down, spoke to no one. When Margaret found her, Beth's first reaction was to run. Please, Margaret blocked the door, gentle but firm. Just listen. He'll kill me. Beth's voice was flat dead. You don't know what he's capable of. I know exactly what he's capable of. Margaret showed her the scars on her wrists, faded now, but still visible. I know what it's like to think death is easier than fighting. But Beth, we can win. We have evidence. We have witnesses. We have a chance. Beth stared at the scars and slowly rolled up her own sleeves. Deeper cuts, more recent. I tried. Her voice broke. 3 times I tried, because being dead seemed better than being afraid forever. Then don't die. Margaret's voice was fierce. Be angry instead. Live out of spite. Live to watch him lose everything the way he took everything from us. Something flickered in Beth's dead eyes. Something that might have been rage underneath all that fear. All right, so quiet it was almost a whisper. I'll testify. But if he gets me, if something happens, you make sure people know why. Nothing's going to happen. We'll step forward. You have my word. We protect each other now. Patricia Lawrence in Fort Collins was the oldest victim at 52. She'd been trapped 8 years from 1863 to 1871, longer than anyone else. Caldwell had used her age against her. Who'd want you anyway? You should be grateful I'm willing to keep you. She lived in a boarding house working as a cook. When Margaret explained why they'd come, Patricia laughed. It was not a happy sound. I'm too old for this fight. You're not too old for justice, Margaret sat across from her. And you're not alone. There are 5 of us now, 7 if we can find the last 2. We can do this together. Patricia studied Margaret's face. You're young, brave, probably stupid, but brave, stupid enough to think we can win. Patricia's smile was sad. Then I'll be stupid with you. God knows I've been a coward long enough. Carolyn Shaw was the hardest. 25 years old, she'd escaped Riverside only 3 months before Margaret in November 1874. She lived with her sister in Greeley, and the sister met them at the door with fury in her eyes. Leave her alone. She's been through enough, I know. Margaret's voice was gentle. I've been through it too. That's why I'm here. She tried to kill herself. The sister's voice broke. Twice she has scars on her wrists. She has nightmares every night, and you want to drag her back into that hell. I want to end it, so no one else has to go through what we did." Margaret met the sister's eyes. "Please, just let me talk to her." Carolyn was in bed staring at the ceiling. She looked at Margaret with eyes that had seen too much survived, too much broken under the weight of too much. "He still visits my nightmares." Her voice was barely audible. "Mine too." Margaret sat carefully on the edge of the bed. "But maybe if we face him together in daylight with law on our side, the nightmares end." "Do you really believe that I have to? Otherwise, he wins forever." Margaret took Caroline's scarred hand. "I'm pregnant, 3 months. And I'm going to testify while carrying this child because I want her to grow up in a world where men like Caldwell face consequences." Carolyn's eyes moved to Margaret's belly. "You're bringing life. I'm carrying death. How do we both testify by choosing life over fear? By saying that what he did to us doesn't get to define who we become?" Caroline was quiet for a long time. Then she squeezed Margaret's hand. "All right, I'll do it. For your baby. For all of us." By February 15th, they had 5 women ready to testify. 5 stories that echoed each other with horrifying precision. 5 lives destroyed by one man's systematic predation. They arrived in Cheyenne as a group, united, ready. The trial began February 18th, 1875. The courthouse was packed. Word had spread about the case about the women accusing a respected businessman of running what was essentially a forced labor operation hidden behind legitimate business. Some spectators were sympathetic. Many were skeptical. Women claiming victimhood always faced doubt. Judge Harold Whitmore was 65, gray-bearded, stern-faced. He'd presided over the territorial court for 20 years and had a reputation for fairness tempered by hard pragmatism. The prosecutor was District Attorney James Harper, 40 years old, ambitious and smart. He'd taken the case because he saw political opportunity in defending wronged women. He also believed they were telling the truth, which helped. Caldwell's defense attorney was Jonathan Reed from Denver. 55, expensive, with a reputation for destroying witnesses on cross-examination. He'd been paid well to make this problem disappear. Caldwell himself sat at the defense table looking prosperous and wronged, the picture of respectability under unjust attack. Harper's opening statement was powerful. "Gentlemen of the jury, this case is about predation. About a man who identified the most vulnerable among us widows with nowhere to turn and systematically trapped them. You will hear from 5 women, 5 separate testimonies spanning 12 years, but you will recognize one pattern." Richard Caldwell preys on desperation. Reed's opening was equally strong. "Gentlemen, this is a case about debt, simple, legal, documented debt. 5 women owe my client money. Rather than pay, they have conspired to destroy his reputation through false accusations. They have invented stories of abuse. They are, in essence, thieves hiding behind tears." The jury, 12 men, looked skeptical. Hannah testified first, calm, detailed, unshakable. She described arriving at the boarding house in 1868. The initial kindness, the debt appearing, the impossible interest, the way Caldwell came to her room one night with his proposal. Reed attacked on cross-examination. "Mrs. Barrett, it's been 7 years since these alleged events. Perhaps your memory is convenient. Perhaps you've forgotten the actual amounts owed." "I haven't forgotten anything." Hannah's voice was steel, "including the night he told me I should be grateful a man of his stature would consider someone as worthless as me." The courtroom stirred. Ruth Morrison testified second. Family connection to the sheriff lent her credibility, but Reed tried to undermine it. "Convenient that your cousin is helping prosecute this case. Convenient that someone finally believed us," Ruth shot back. "My husband believed me. That's why he married me. To get me away from Caldwell." Beth Carter testified third. She was visibly shaking, voice barely audible. Reed attacked mercilessly. "You attempted suicide twice, correct? Clearly you're mentally unstable." "I'm traumatized." Beth's voice broke, but she kept going. "There's a difference. I tried to kill myself because I couldn't escape him any other way. Because the law wouldn't help. Because no one believed me." Patricia Lawrence was fourth. The oldest victim, she testified about 8 years of systematic exploitation. Reed tried to paint her as bitter about age. "No one wanted to marry you anyway, did they? Mrs. Lawrence, perhaps you're simply angry about your circumstances. I'm angry about being trapped. Patricia's voice was firm. About being told I should be grateful for abuse because I was too old to deserve better. About watching younger women arrive and seeing the same trap close around them. Then Jacob Sullivan took the stand. He detailed his 3 years working for Caldwell. 16 women he had personally tracked who tried to escape. The pattern of debts that grew impossibly fast. The threats, the violence, and crucially, he produced his evidence. 2 sets of ledgers, the forged ones showing legitimate debts, the real ones showing the actual minimal costs Caldwell had incurred. Mr. Sullivan, you claim to have kept these records for 2 years. Reed's voice dripped skepticism. Yet you only present them now. Why? Because I was waiting for someone brave enough to use them. Jacob's eyes moved to Margaret in the gallery. Someone willing to stand up to Caldwell publicly. My sister couldn't. She died trying. But Mrs. Hayes could. He pulled out a necklace. This is the jewelry Caldwell claimed my sister stole. I found it in his desk after she died. He planted evidence to have her arrested when she tried to leave. The courtroom erupted. Judge Whitmore pounded his gavel. Order. Order. Finally, on the 3rd day, Margaret took the stand. She was 6 months pregnant and now showing clearly. She wore a simple dress, her hair pulled back, no artifice or pretense. Just a woman who'd survived. Mrs. Hayes, please state your name for the record. Harper's voice was gentle. Margaret Ann Hayes, formerly Margaret Thompson of Philadelphia. Please tell the court how you met Richard Caldwell. Margaret told her story. All of it, Philadelphia, her doctor father, her education, John's death, her pregnancy, her desperation. Caldwell's boarding house in June 1873. She detailed the debt spiral with mathematical precision, showing the intelligence Reed couldn't dispute. Room and board started at $15 monthly. By August, it was $25. By October 30, the principal never decreased, no matter how many hours I worked, because interest was calculated at 50% monthly on the total balance. The jury leaned forward. In November 1873, Mr. Caldwell came to my room. He told me I'd make an excellent wife. That marriage would erase my debt. When I refused politely, he returned 3 days later and tried to force himself on me. Margaret's voice didn't waver. I pushed him away. He fell. He threatened to have me arrested for assault, for theft. He said he'd make sure I never worked again, that he'd take my daughter. So you ran, Harper said softly. I ran. For 13 months. 6 towns. Every time I found work, he found me. Sent men, sent letters. Made it impossible to stay anywhere. Finally, I walked through a blizzard because dying in snow seemed preferable to going back. Why did you wait 18 months to press charges? Because I was terrified. Because I had a daughter to protect. Because everywhere I went, Caldwell found me. Margaret paused. Until I found people who believed me, who stood with me, who gave me the strength to stop running. Why come forward now, when you're pregnant, when you have a safe home? Margaret's hand moved to her belly. Because this child deserves a mother who stands up to evil. Because Ann Sullivan and all the others deserve justice. Because if I don't fight now, Caldwell wins forever. The courtroom was silent. Reed's cross-examination was brutal. Mrs. Hayes, you claim to be educated, a doctor's daughter, yet you signed debt documents without reading them carefully. I read them. They said $15 monthly. He changed them later. Or you're lying. Perhaps you did owe $500 and this story is fabricated to avoid payment. Why would I invent this? Margaret's voice rose. Why would I put myself through this humiliation, this exposure to avoid debt, to gain sympathy, to... Reed paused then struck. You're pregnant, Mrs. Hayes. Who is the father? The courtroom gasped. Harper shot to his feet. Objection irrelevant. It speaks to character, Your Honor. Reed's voice was smooth. Mrs. Hayes claims assault in November 1873. Yet she's pregnant now. February 1875. Clearly she's been intimate with men. Perhaps her claims of trauma are exaggerated. Margaret stood. The judge tried to tell her to sit, but she ignored him. Her voice rang through the courthouse. The father is William Thornton, the man who saved my life when I collapsed in his snow, the man who treated me like a human being instead of property. Yes, we were intimate, because he asked, because he respected my choices, because he loved me without conditions. She turned to face the jury directly. Richard Caldwell tried to buy me. Will Thornton loved me. If you can't see the difference between coercion and consent, between ownership and partnership, then you're as broken as Caldwell, Judge. Mrs. Hayes, sit down. But Margaret wasn't finished. I've spent 18 months running from shame, from fear, from a man who thought my poverty made me his. Well, I'm not ashamed anymore. I'm angry, and I'm asking you to be angry with me. She sat. The courthouse erupted. Reed had no response. The jury deliberated 4 hours. Margaret sat in a small room with Will, his hand in hers, both of them silent. The other women waited in the hallway. Jacob paced like a caged animal. When the bailiff came to bring them back, Margaret's legs almost didn't hold her. Will steadied her. Together, no matter what. The courtroom was packed, standing room only. Everyone wanted to hear the verdict. The jury foreman stood, a middle-aged man with tired eyes. On the charge of fraud in the first degree, how do you find guilty? Margaret's breath stopped. On the charge of false imprisonment, guilty. On the charge of assault, the foreman hesitated. Guilty on 4 counts, not guilty on 1 count. Mixed verdict, but enough, more than enough. Judge Whitmore's face was grave as he addressed Caldwell. Mr. Caldwell, you have systematically preyed upon the vulnerable. You have used law as a weapon. You have destroyed lives for profit. This court sentences you to 15 years in territorial prison. He paused. Furthermore, your assets are seized. All debts claimed against your victims are hereby voided. You will pay restitution to each woman you harmed in the amount they allegedly owed you plus damages. Caldwell exploded. Outrageous! I'll appeal. I'll have you removed from the bench. I'll destroy all of you. Remove him. Whitmore's voice was ice. As marshals dragged him away, Caldwell's eyes found Margaret. This isn't over. You'll pay. All of you will pay. Margaret met his gaze. Her voice was soft but careful.